Welcome to the Daily Objective. I'm Michael Liebowitz, and I'm joined here today by the one and the only, the great James Stevens Valliant. Welcome, Jim.
Hey, how you doing, Michael?
Well, as you know, here at the Ayn Rand Center UK, we apply Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism to current events. And the current event we're going to be discussing today is the three Israeli hostages killed by the Israeli Defense Force when they had their shirts off and were waving makeshift white flags. So, Jim, dive right in and tell me what you think.
I am horrified, of course, at the death of hostages. But to me, it is obviously Hamas's fault. It wouldn't have mattered whether they had been killed on October 7th with the rest of their victims or by IDF 2 days ago. It's still Hamas's fault. The minute you put a gun to someone's head, if someone is taking steps to free the hostage that you've taken, even if there should be negligence, even if there is negligence on the part, say, of the cop who's trying to release the hostage so that the victim gets killed or injured, it's the fault of the guy who took the hostage in the first place. I mean, you have to be conceptual. I mean, it's true. We have to look at consequences and causes. We have to consider the future. Now, I'll put myself as personally into this as I possibly can. I've been married to 26 years to the love of my life and my
Thought you were
soulmate.
going to say to 26 women.
No. Just one. Only been married once and only to one woman. I think she would have objected had there been more than one at the same time. Anyway,
You're not a Mormon.
I'm not a Mormon. That's right. And Holly would have little patience for sister wives, I can tell you. On the other hand, she is the love of my life. She's my soulmate. I've been married to her for 26 years, for over a quarter of a century. Were I to lose her, it would be like losing both my arms and both my legs at the same time. I'm not sure how I would continue, honestly. If I could, it would take massive psychotherapy and effort on my part. So I try to project in my own mind what I would feel if Holly were taken captive by monsters like Hamas. I would look at the reaction. The victims say, demand, do whatever it takes, demand whatever negotiations are required to get these hostages home. Um, I hope I would be able to realize that by demanding that they do whatever it took, negotiate, release whatever Palestinians Israel has, whatever terrorists they have, come to a ceasefire agreement, whatever it is, that the families of these hostages are demanding of the Israeli government. I hope I would not be like that. I dismiss what they say because they are so emotionally biased here. But I would ask them this question, and I know it's hard, but I hope I would ask myself the same question if it was Holly, my wife. How many more October 7ths am I willing to demand for her life? How many Israeli soldiers' lives would I demand in exchange for my loved one's life? Because if Israel has to do things differently, it's going to cost more IDF soldiers' lives, even if there was negligence. And I understand some of these hostages were waving white flags, surrender, calling out in Hebrew. Even if there were, could that have been a Hamas trap? Absolutely. If you were Hamas luring IDF into a trap, what would you do? Would you call out in Arabic? No, you'd call out in Hebrew. Would you look like a terrorist, or would you look like a shirtless person waving a white flag? It could have easily been a trap. But even assuming, and I'll just make the assumption there was some negligence on the part of IDF, it's still 100% Hamas's fault. Still 100% Hamas's fault. Nor should Israel change any of its policies. This is why Razi's position, it may have felt and been heard as inhuman. But when it initially happened, it's what, 70 days ago? What did he say? We have to treat them as though they were dead. With exception, with an asterisk. If there is some way to get them out, if there is some way we could get them out, of course we take it. Special forces, whatever it is. But it is a higher value to kill the hostage takers and to prevent that from ever happening again. The higher value is no more October 7th. The higher value is no more hostage taking as such. The higher value is incapacitating Hamas from doing this again, even than the individual lives of the hostages. Because I would have to conceptualize this, and I would have to have some moral clarity, even if it were Holly. I would say to myself, I can't ask IDF soldiers to die. I can't demand more October 7th as the price for getting her home. Now, that takes a conceptualization there. That takes some real value consideration on my part. If it was me, forget the IDF. I'm going in to say, if I were at any chance, I would, even if it meant my own life, I would do it to get Holly back. That's me. I cannot demand Israel die, their own soldiers die, so that I could get my value back. I could not demand more October 7th to get my loved one back, could I? That is exactly, if there's any kind of demand that says, I'm sorry, Israel it was Israeli bullets that killed these hostages. If you cannot if that has concrete bound, anti-conceptual, narrow-minded, morally fuzzy emotionalist, if that's the way you're going to approach it, then what in effect is, I'm going to be telling you, if you want hostages released at all costs, you are requiring more October 7th. You are requiring the death of more Israeli soldiers. And that is not a price that I could rationally demand of anyone, even for Holly.
Okay. Well, I agree with Razi's position that when the hostages are taken, you can't execute a war when you're bombing Gaza, in such a way as to, well, we're not going to try to hit the hostages because we don't know where they are. I agree with that. I also agree that ultimately Hamas is responsible. But I have a question for you as a former prosecutor. I don't want you to evaluate. I just want you to explain, and then I'll make my point. What is the difference between ultimate and proximate cause?
Well, there's a legal term of art. And when we talk about something being the proximate cause, what we're saying is that it's a legally liable. Scientifically or epistemologically, what a proximate cause is depends on the context. As an objectivist, what we're asking is a context-bound question. Proximate means near, obviously, immediate cause. And obviously, we talk about the cause of, what is the cause of Michael Liebowitz? Well, we could go back how many generations to your ancestors, the thousands of ancestors.
To the Big Bang.
It's the cause of Michael Liebowitz, right? So cause itself, it can be a sort of, everything is interconnected, right? So if I'm asking the cause of one thing, I may need to boil it down to broad scientific principles of physics to describe causes. But what I'm doing is a vast integration, and the question is always contextual. When I say, what is the important cause in this moral context? That's the question you're asking. What's the important moral cause? Let's say, and the principle in law, for example, is that an intentional act cuts off the negligence that might be a causal factor that came before it. So let's say there was a whole bunch of negligence, right? And someone then said, I'm going to take advantage of this moment and intentionally do something. My intentional act cuts off the liability of all those before. I'm the one responsible for it because I intended it.
Right.
So in this case, the negligence, let's assume there was negligence on the part of the IDF. Their negligence is irrelevant compared to the intentional act of taking these people hostage, which was what put them into the threat of death as such in the first place. They would never have been, their lives would never have been threatened. First, their lives were threatened by Hamas. Come with us or you're dead. Israel, do what we want or you're dead. So they're already threatened with death by Hamas. Okay, so if there's some negligence in trying to save them on the part of IDF, that is morally irrelevant as a cause, even though it is a causal factor. In other words, the causal factor of who owned the bullets is irrelevant morally in that context when you have an intentional hostage taker like Hamas.
But who fired the bullets is not irrelevant. And
No,
like
it
you
is
said, well,
irrelevant.
Jim, hold on.
Is it?
Let me hold on,
Okay,
hold on. Like
okay.
like you said, you have to consider the entire context. The Israeli army, the IDF, they have rules of engagement that they're supposed to follow. These rules of engagement exist for a reason. They don't merely exist to protect the enemy. One of the rules of engagement is when somebody waves a white flag, in the way that was done here, you do not attack. That rule exists. Now we could be short range thinkers and say, you know what, I don't care. Hamas is bad. Let's kill him. But I promise you, if 5 years from now there's a bunch of Israelis waving white flags and some Arab country smashes them, there's going to be people up in arms saying they violated the rules of engagement, much in the way that Hamas did when they took the hostages. Those
Well,
type of things exist for a reason. And again, Hamas is ultimately responsible. That does not negate the culpability of the people that killed those three Israeli hostages.
if they, well, first, if the rule was rational. So, for example, you give a certain rule of engagement, such as you can't fire on someone anytime they wave a white flag. Well, I'd be coming out with my machine guns, blasting in both arms like Arnold Schwarzenegger with a little white flag on my head waving. If
But
that
that's
was
not
the
what
case,
happened here, Jim.
ah,
That wasn't
ah.
what
But
happened.
okay, wait, wait, wait,
No,
wait,
but
wait,
that's not
wait,
what
wait,
happened.
wait, wait,
You
wait,
guys
wait.
were shirtless.
Okay, okay, look, wait, wait. Gotta let me finish this too, Michael. If we had such a stupid rule as anytime there's a white flag raised, you can't shoot them, that would be a concrete bound sort of thing that it would be a poor rule. Let's assume that your rule of engagement never hit someone with a white flag is correct. Let's say that the rule of engagement was it's demonstrable these guys are not Hamas. Well, obviously, under those circumstances, if there was a rational rule about it and that showing of the white flag showed they were not Hamas, then of course I do blame. And they should, the IDF soldiers who broke the rules of engagement, the Israeli rules of engagement, should be punished by the Israelis for that violation. I absolutely agree. Now, that's why I asked the deeper question about the context. Is this a case where it was clear and they should have known? I do not know yet. I need a lot more facts. It's like I say to so many people when a crime happens, and people they start taking sides. Whether it's Floyd from 2020 or whatever the case, criminal cases, people Rittenhouse, whatever the case is, people take sides before they know the facts. I would ask people. I know it happened more than 48 hours ago. I think we're on almost day 3 now since it happened. But the
Mm-hmm.
point is that this has been more than 2 days, and we do have some of the facts. As you say, shirtless, waving white flag, calling out in Hebrew. I want all the facts, though. I want a thorough investigation. If anyone were charged with a crime like that by IDF, anyone charged with any crime, I would wait to judge until I had all the facts on the table and before I could even begin to judge. So this situation is one in which I think both of us have to do a little hypothetical. If this is this context versus if this is the context. That's why
Well,
I'm going through it like
well,
this.
well, well, Jim, barring we just getting outright misinformation, which I grant to you is possible. When
Yeah,
in war, you never know.
yeah.
But what we know, or at least what we think we know, is that you had shirtless Israeli hostages. We don't know that the IDF knew they were Israeli. True. We know they were waving white flags. We know that to attack such people, whether they be Israeli hostages or anybody else, violates the Israeli rules of engagement. I don't know if you read this, so I can't say we know, but I know that the Israelis have admitted wrongdoing on the part of the people that fired those shots.
That is indicative. Their admission tells me something about their values, though. It doesn't tell me
Well,
about
maybe
how
so.
I would evaluate
But
it.
there's a deeper problem here, Jim, that I see with your argument, and that's this. You say, well, if the rules of engagement are rational,
Right.
if every individual soldier on a battlefield gets to decide which rules are rational, you have complete and utter chaos.
If the rule subjects the soldier to irrational harm, to unjustifiable harm, then the rule is bullshit.
I don't disagree with you. What
Okay,
I'm
so
saying
you
is
have
that,
to
but there's,
evaluate
but
validity
hold
of the
on.
rule. The
Jim, you're
validity
a
of the rule
soldier.
would be, in other
Jim,
words, would you agree? Let me just ask you this. Do you think that a concrete bound rule, like anytime someone waves a right flag, you can never shoot them, would make sense?
no,
I
but I
don't.
don't believe that's what the entirety of the rule
Okay,
is. But
okay,
I'm
I
not reading
understand.
the whole
I
thing.
understand, but let's.
But what I'm saying to you is, if suppose that's the rule, suppose it, the
Yeah,
rules of war, rules of all types of moral questions, that some of them get very complicated.
they do.
And it's hard.
Yeah.
When you're on a battlefield, you don't have the time to take place in the type of contextual moral analysis that we do. So you have your rules of engagement. Now, if
Important
each,
fact.
yes, now if each soldier gets to decide which one's rational, which one isn't, you could never execute a war. That's
Well,
why you have these things ahead of time. We spend a lot of time arguing for the Enlightenment basis of the state of Israel, that it's a modern state, that it's rational. That's why we defend it. Then all of a sudden, when it comes down to something like this, well, maybe the rule wasn't rational. We can't just assume it's not rational. We can't
we're
even
not
go
going to.
that route.
Well, no, well, the way Israel's fighting this war and the way America's been fighting wars recently, I do assume that their rules of engagement are irrational. Forgive me.
Well, okay, I'll
No,
grant you that,
secondly,
but then
secondly,
maybe we ought not
so
to have
so
such a
even
full-throated
the more, in
support.
fact, the more civilized countries probably have rules of engagement that are far too constraining, that actually restrict their moral, what they should morally be doing,
Yeah, I agree.
killing. So their rules of engagement might be, and if a rule of engagement, and if I'm a soldier and I have a choice between me and my buddy's life versus this stupid rule of engagement, I can tell you what I'm deciding, Michael.
Sure, but you would also know that you would have to face a consequence for it.
Yeah, and I would go in and say this rule of engagement is what killed is irrational against our interests as a side and is causing death. And so I would argue against the rule of engagement that was irrational. So we do need to question the rules of engagement, especially.
I don't disagree
So
that subsequent we have to
so
question.
if the
I don't
question is
disagree.
moral, if you're asking me the objective moral question, I am going to ask the validity of the and the Israeli admission of wrongdoing is insufficient. That's their evaluation of their rule, not my evaluation. Thank you. I might disagree.
Okay, Jim, but then okay. So you have a situation then where soldiers can decide on the fly which rules are rational. When their own government comes out and said no, they broke the rules, we say, well, we're not going to trust them. Then how do we ever get to the truth? We certainly don't trust the media, right? So how do we ever get to a
Well,
situation where we can
you
say they did
hopefully.
wrong?
Well, look, we know some facts, and we're discussing some of those facts. I want to know the full context of facts. I need for my evaluation.
But Jim, that's different than what you said at the beginning. Come on. At the beginning, you gave a full-throated defense of the Israelis. You weren't saying from the get-go, we need more information. You gave a
No, and all
passionate
that's still
thing.
true. But all that's
It,
still true.
listen, it's true without a
I
shadow
haven't,
of a
I
doubt in
haven't,
my
I haven't
mind.
altered my position.
Passionately, the Israelis are the morally superior actor in this conflict.
That's
No
right.
doubt about it. I even agree with Razi's initial position. I agree that the rules of engagement sometimes may suck. I don't disagree with any of that.
And what I said was,
But that doesn't rule out is individual Israelis doing wrong or the Israeli government doing wrong.
like I say, I hope I was precise in the beginning. Even if the IDF soldiers were negligent, the intentional wrongdoing on the part of Hamas sort of makes that morally irrelevant. I will not ignore it. That is to say, within the IDF, if there was something that was negligent, I'll give them the appropriate punishment.
Okay. Okay, I'm
Be
with you then.
it
Then we're
wouldn't
on
be
the same page.
exactly,
And we're on the
exactly.
same page. Okay.
And if the rule were irrational, which I suspect it might be, and I have reason to suspect it might be, I would challenge the rule. But for me to know, right? And absolutely, if it is a rational rule of engagement, then absolutely they must follow it. And I would not even give them. I wouldn't even go beyond that to question the if, on the other hand, if, and this is the big if, on the other hand, they were merely negligent, and you see, within my understanding of Hamas's evil here so overwhelms the mere negligence of the. Now, on the other hand, if they knew, let's imagine a different scenario. I don't have any reason to believe this, and I'm not sure Israeli soldiers would do this. So I think it would be probably unlikely to be true. They knew they were Israelis and killed them on purpose, knowing them to be innocent hostages.
Mhm.
I doubt that very seriously.
Oh, I do too. I don't think they do
Okay,
that at all.
full stop. We're
Yeah.
looking at a situation where IDF may have behaved negligently in the face of horrific, intentional, murderous hostage taking on the
I
part of Hamas.
I don't disagree
That's
with
the
you at all.
context that I'm.
Yeah.
That's what I passionately came out in favor of in the
Yeah.
beginning. I'm
Listen, I'm
still
with you,
there.
Jim. I'm with
Yeah,
you. All I'm saying is in these situations, if we're going to be intellectually and morally consistent, we have to acknowledge, okay, there was wrongdoing here.
absolutely. You know, if they have rules, you know, I've had friends who served in the military. Good buddy who served tours in Vietnam, and you know, there were all kinds of moments where, for a time, for a couple months, he was a radio operator as a sergeant once, and there were all kinds of times where messages needed to be delivered. And there were just so many messages piling up over here. He would do his best to deliver the message, and then he'd find out someone hadn't delivered a message that should have been delivered and could have been. And then he finds out, oh, well, that guy was overwhelmed at the time with messages he had to be delivered. Oh, well, okay. Is that failure to deliver the message a rule, a violation of the right? Now I ask you, what's the punishment that's appropriate when both communication sergeants are being overwhelmed with messages? Someone violates one of the rules. It's comparative negligence. They're not the aggressors. They're not the killers. They're not war criminals.
But there
That's
is
what I'm saying.
comparative negligence.
Unless you can prove these Israeli soldiers knew these were Israeli hostages, they are not war criminals.
Okay.
They may be
I didn't say
negligent.
they're war criminals.
Okay. Okay. Then
I don't know enough
negligent.
about international law to make any type of statement like that. All I
Okay.
know is that according to the Israeli rules of engagement that they're operating under, from all appearances, they were extremely negligent. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Then we have negligent soldiers. We don't have murderers who
I'm
intentionally
not
kill.
saying they're murderers. I
Okay.
never said that.
That is the important.
This is my problem that comes with when we talk about war, and I'll try to make this brief. By analogy, I have a friend of mine who's a police officer. Yes, I'm an ex-convict, and here I am with a prosecutor, and I'm going to tell you about a conversation I had with a friend of mine who's a cop. But we
What
actually,
am I doing talking to you, by the way?
I don't know, but we were talking about police officers and how it may be understandable. Say a guy leads them on a high-speed chase, they're putting their lives at risk, and at the end, they give the guy, a tune-up. You know what a tune-up is? They give the guy a beating.
Yeah.
And he says, Michael, you don't think that's understandable. Well, of course I do, but it's irrelevant to whether I think it's understandable.
Oh,
The
yeah.
fact of the matter is, police officers are supposed to be held to a higher standard. And when you're supposed to be held to a higher standard, when you're judged to be a hero on all types of occasions where you're doing what's right, when people actually, in the case of police officers, get more time for crimes against police officers, when you're going to elevate them, put them on a pedestal, then you're damn right they better know how to hold their cool in those situations. And it's the
Absolutely.
same thing with the military. I personally, on a personal level, completely understand it. You're up to your neck. Your friends are dying. Your country's just been attacked. You're angry. You're upset. Of course, I get that. You're pissed off. These people have been launching rockets at you for decades. Your own government hasn't done enough to eradicate them. I understand that. But at the same time, you have to hold them accountable to the training that they have and the rules of engagement that they've agreed to. That's all I'm saying.
To the extent that they violated their own rules, they should be punished. But I would ask that those punishments take into account all the context that is
Yeah,
involved,
of course.
including
All
me.
relevant factors.
And for example, I would distinguish between the cops who chased down someone and they got really pissed off and beat the crap out of this guy versus even this case. Even
It
if
is
the
different. It was just an analogy. I was just going to make a
yeah,
point. You're
see,
right.
but
It's
but
different.
even in this case, I don't see a let's just beat the crap out of them because they pissed me off.
No, no, no.
I
It
have
was
a
just the
motive.
emotional context in
See,
what you're
I've
dealing with is what I'm
prosecuted
talking
cops.
about.
I've prosecuted cops who've lied, engaged in excessive force as a prosecutor.
Oh, I don't believe any police officers ever lied, Jim. So you're already.
Oh, well, I walked into work one day. The local newspaper said prosecutor accuses cop of lying. Well, in my closing argument, I'd just done that the night before, and I realized the story was all about me. And I called into the boss's office. Is it true, Jim, that you
Jim.
called one of our heroes in blue a liar on the stand? Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Explain
Heroes
the
in blue.
context.
Yeah.
I explained the
Yeah.
context, and my boss says you did the right thing. So yeah, we prosecute the cop who for excessive force. We prosecute the cop when he lies. We hold them to a higher standard, even. Absolutely, absolutely. I do not see any real malice yet on the part of IDF. Do hear them saying that they violated their own rules of engagement. And unless I believe that they knew these were Israeli hostages, I'm going to think that it was mere negligence. Rather, even then, the sort of malicious anger that a cop who's
Sure.
using
Well, if they knew they were Israeli hostages, that's a different ball game
that
altogether.
is
Yeah.
murder, and they should be treated as
Yeah,
murderers.
that's the ball game.
And I
Jim,
doubt very seriously it was that.
no, I don't think so. We have a super chat from Bonnie Bertrand for 99 cents. Thank you very much, Bonnie. Jim, an interesting aside here as far as the police lying. And I want to give a little speech in a second. When I went to trial and I was guilty as sin. Listen, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Every cop that got on that stand lied. No, I was guilty. Listen, there's no reason for me. You know what I mean? I did my time. It's over and done with. But the cop, one of the cops said that he threw a handful of quarters on the table and said, if you need to call your lawyer here, you go ahead. Never happened. Never. You know what I mean? So I don't know. That's just something like when you said we were talking about cops lying and you prosecuted, it came to my mind. But this discussion that we're having here and the whole war over there and a lot of our political discussion about what takes place at home really for me illustrate the point of what a mixed emotional world we live. I mean, moral world we live in. We live in a mixed economy that's indicative of our mixed morality, and it makes these discussions so difficult to have. And people will often say to me, "Oh, but you have to be pragmatic and live in the real world." And my thing is, living by principles is what's pragmatic.
Yeah.
This chaos is what doesn't work. This chaos leads one to not know how to act or what to do or what to think in many situations because you just don't know. You've got Israel, who we say unequivocally morally superior to Hamas. But yet, are they catering to international pressure? Do they build these rules into their thing, that into their, codes, even though they're irrational because they want to cater to somebody else? Are they giving into pressure from the United States? There's just so many variables that come into equation because of the mixed morality that we're dealing with. And that I think comes back to I know our ultimate mission and in the mission of a station like ARCUK is to promote rationality or rational morality. And this discussion to me illustrates it because you and I, if you were to have us debate moral principles, you and I would basically agree down the line 100%. But then you get these complex situations, and it's like, well, what about this? Because there's so much mixed stuff there. Now that I've said that, I want your take on that from both a long-term objectivist, a prosecutor. Like, what do you think about that? What's the solution to it? What do we do?
I believe that our old rules of law tend to be a lot more, just as a lawyer, this isn't going to be my evaluation of the law. Um, the old rules of common law, and the older the principle, the better, in my view. They were inductive, they were integrative, they were based on solid principles in most cases. And that's the thing. Only an objectivist, and this is where our epistemology is really, really helpful, can tell us when the principle, the rule of engagement, say, or the rule that the cop has to obey, is valid, is rational. There are some, in the 1960s and 1970s, within my lifetime, the Supreme Court sort of federalized criminal procedure. States could do their own thing with confessions and arrests and so forth. No, no, no. The Bill of Rights now applies against the states. And so now we have to have only voluntary statements and Miranda rules, et cetera, so forth and so on. So a lot of cops thought, oh, these rules are stupid. And so they routinely would come into court and lie. Oh, if this is about whether or not Michael had been given a chance to give a voluntary statement and contact his lawyer, I'm a cop. I have no problem lying about that because I think the rule is bull. That's how a lot of cops think. That's
Pragmatism.
exactly how a lot of cops think.
Pragmatism, right?
Pragmatism.
Yeah.
And
Michael's guilty. We know it. So the ends
so
justify the
therefore,
means.
let's cut a path through, even if I fudge a bunch of facts to get
Yeah.
there, especially if I disagree with the procedural rules that would have excluded his statement for some technical reason. And that's how the cop is thinking. So this is why we need sound principles. We need sound principles that not, no, you're never going to convince every cop, but that a cop, a rational cop at least, could theoretically say, no, I have to obey that rule. It's critical. Even if the guy may be guilty, this rule is so rational, I must attend to this rule, and it's more important even than catching the criminal in this case. Now, if we have principles that sound, now that requires conceptual thinking, sound conceptual thinking, identifying the correct essence. Nominalism, of course, destroys this because essence is purely arbitrary, man-made. And of course, the religious people, they're intrinsicists, and they'll say a microbe is life and you can't do an abortion. So whether it's religious intrinsicism or total nominalist subjectivism, the philosophy is the enemy here of having sound principles. And when the world was a little more rational in the Enlightenment in the 19th century, the Anglo-American legal system was a little more rational because these principles had to be realistic, applicable to the getting at the essence of what we want the rule to be, to be achieving. And they were integrated with each other in a more consistent way. We've lost that today. We've lost that philosophically today. And worse, consider these war rules of engagement. When I heard about the rules of engagement, say, in Afghanistan, back when George W. Bush was invading Afghanistan, I thought to myself, we've lost already. When we let Al Qaeda escape in Tora Bora, it's like, okay, well, why are we even fighting this war? We're just killing a bunch of young people. And that's literally what it becomes. If the principle is so irrational, is based on altruism, is based on, we can't have collateral damage. We've got to be the morally superior ones. We're stronger. Therefore, we've got to pull our punches. If all that moral crap comes in and pollutes our concepts, our principles, then our principles are only going to be self-destructive and counterproductive. And they're not really even principles, are they? They're just intrinsicist mantras or concrete bound, right? That's why I asked about, when Israel says our rules were violated. I'm not done with the analysis. What was the rule? Why did you have it? How was it violated in this case? I doubt these people knew, these IDF soldiers knew they were Israeli hostages. Maybe they did. If they did, they're murderers. I want them charged with murder.
Yeah, for sure.
So no, the rules, of course, have got to apply. And as I've always said, our rules about our military and our cops, by the way, are for our purposes.
Right.
It's not for criminals and it's not for the enemy.
Yeah, give an analogy.
Guys staying good.
It's like, the Fifth and the Sixth Amendments, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth Amendments, for instance, the Fourth Amendment, the right against unreasonable search and seizure, Fifth Amendment, right to due process, right to confront your accusers, Sixth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment's the right to an attorney, and then Eighth Amendment, you have the no cruel and unusual punishment. These things are not there to protect criminals. They're there to protect innocent people. The criminals happen to benefit from them. And that's kind of my point about these laws.
That's right. That's why I asked about the rule. That's why I asked about the rule. Look, we want to protect the hostages. If there are rules that the IDF have to follow that would protect the hostages without preventing them from killing the Hamas or causing them to risk their lives unnecessarily, right? Any rule, let's imagine ourselves and it's not difficult for me to imagine this. Israel has a rule that unfairly ties one hand behind the soldier's back so that anytime I'm inventing a concrete bound intrinsicist sort of rule. Anytime you got a white flag, you can't shoot the guy. What if the guy's got the Palestinian kerchief on? You can see the weapon behind him and he's just waving a white flag. Okay, that's silly. I would disobey that rule.
White flag in one hand, the gun in the other.
Exactly. White flag in one hand, gun in the other. Well, you see, a concrete bound rule like that would be silly, and I wouldn't demand that the soldier obey it. Now, I know the rule is probably not that stupid. The rule is a little more subtle than that.
Well, it was passed by a government, so there is always that possibility.
Yes, but you see the distinction I'm making, though.
Sure.
That's all. And so the question in my mind is, since I don't think they intentionally killed what they knew to be Israeli hostages, I still need to know some more facts about what the rule is. Is the rule rational? Is the rule applicable, even rationally applicable by a soldier? Because I know of all kinds of rules that we impose. Cops, let me use, since you're using the analogy of local law enforcement, there have been times where you want to know why cops lie about criminal procedure in so many often. They will go to they'll do a traffic stop. They'll find drugs. Now, the situation of the detention and the arrest are challenged in a search and seizure motion. Judges on appeal disagree. The 3-judge panel is divided 2-1. The Supreme Court is divided 4-5. Now, months of theoretical analysis by these brilliant lawyers and judges cause divided opinions. How is the cop in the next 2 minutes supposed to evaluate that situation when it's going to take months and years for expert lawyers and judges to figure it out? And
Which is
so
why
if we impose absurd rules on the cops,
sure.
then of course we're demanding that they act against the rules.
No,
We're demanding it.
there's something a little, I don't know if I want to say deeper, but that's really attached. I was having a conversation with my friend Brent the other day, and we were talking about the George Floyd killing or death. And there's some people raising some points right now that are suggesting maybe we weren't getting the truth in the beginning. But here's my issue, and this is with everything now. I spent 40 minutes listening to a podcast with 2 guys talking about it. I've also read the autopsy. Now they've got an hour and a half documentary. I simply, because I don't trust the media, and that's my point. If I want to know things, I'm going to have to now spend an hour and a half watching a documentary on top of the 40 minutes that I've already put in, plus the reading, I simply don't have the time for every story that comes up to do that. So in this case here, like we're talking, okay, well, we need to know, is the rule rational? Okay, well, if I want to know that now, I can't just take the media's point of view on it. I have to actually go read the Israeli code of engagement. And beyond that, then I have to really investigate, what do various witnesses say about what occurred.
Let me cut through some of this. We can set the rule aside if I can know the facts. In other words, I can evaluate if I can see the tape, see what happened.
If we can trust the media,
I can get facts that I can rely on. Exactly.
Yes.
So
and that's my problem.
Prosecutor, what I would do often is you said you have to do in-depth investigation. Show me all the evidence. I got to check it out myself. Were there other witnesses? We got to go check out those witnesses. We've got to actually verify what happened and see what we can and cannot prove, what we can know and not know. And I've got the burden of proof, so I've got to know with certainty that certain things happened. Sure. And they've got to meet those hurdles. But let me put it this way. Irrational rules, like an indiscriminate exclusionary rule, encourage cops to lie. Irrational rules of engagement in war.
Incentives matter, no matter where you are in life.
Right. So an irrational rule of engagement for the American military in Afghanistan is going to cause more violence and more lies. Just as an irrational rule of engagement for the cops, say the way we have the exclusionary rule, is just going to encourage them to lie.
You got to tell people what the exclusionary rule
is. If evidence, and folks overseas may not get it too in Britain. In the United States, we have a rule. If the cops violated some constitutional procedure about the acquisition of evidence or the obtaining of the arrest, we suppress the evidence. Yeah. So let's say with the cops don't have a search warrant, they come into your home and there they find a dead body and the murder weapon with your fingerprints on it. Guess what? He gets away with murder.
Yeah.
He gets away with murder because the cop inappropriately came. So instead of punishing the cop for coming into the house without probable cause and still letting the evidence in so the murderer gets it, we have a rule that protects the murderer 100% and only punishes the cop.
And the fruit of the poisonous tree, too. It goes in there, too, where everything down the line
And I
it ends
don't,
up getting excluded.
and I'm not religious about this. There are contexts in which the inappropriate acquisition of the evidence affects the quality of the evidence. In those
Sure.
cases, I'm all in favor of excluding the evidence. On the other hand, if it doesn't, punish the cop, punish the IDF soldier for breaking the rule to the see, and there we measure the proportion. How did he break the rule? Did the cop, for example, in breaking the rule, he was running after him. He just didn't realize. Was it one of these cases where the judges would be different? He had to make a split decision on something a panel of judges would disagree about. There, I'm going to be very forgiving of the cop. Period.
Sure.
How's he
In
supposed
that
to know?
in those examples with the exclusionary rule are very heavily influenced by more irrational laws, of course, the drug war. Because most of the stuff in America where you end up with that stuff is there's searches for drugs, people getting pulled over for
99%
drugs.
of all the search and seizure cases come from drug cases. And all the bad law on search and seizure, I might add, comes from, and all 99% of the search and seizure cases and all of the bad rules on it come from our war on drugs. When you make the simple possession of something illegal, you are going to have all kinds of problems with this. And yes, 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 I can't agree with you more. If we did away with the war on drugs, most of the search and seizure issues that I have a problem with would vanish and could vanish. See, if you got marijuana and the cop violated the rule, then frankly, the cop violating the rule is more important than the guy who's got marijuana. If it's a murder case and he was running through the door and a panel of judges would disagree, well, then I feel just the opposite. The poor
Sure.
cop, he didn't know what to do, and this guy's a murderer.
I
Okay.
remember reading, Jim, in Opar, where Leonard Peikoff, he was quoting Hegel about the truth is one. How everything's connected. In all these instances, they're indicative of what happens when you have irrational rules, irrational people, and irrational morality. And that brings us right back to the Ayn Rand Center UK, where what we need is more people to accept the rational epistemology. And I'm not saying that means you have to figure out the conceptual common denominator on every single entity you ever come across and concept you form, of it, but just a rational epistemology and a rational morality. This is what we need.
This is absolutely what we need. And if the true is the whole, then it works in every context going down. Legal rights are a unity and can only be understood as a unity. If we think of this right in competition with this right or conflict of right, which is the way our legal system views it these days, there's competing right. No, no, no. The minute you go down that, you are making mistakes, injustice will occur, rights will be violated. Rights are a unified whole, just as the truth is the whole. And when we approach war or crime, which are in effect what it should be the government's moral response to the initiation of force, that's exactly what we're talking about. The principles have to be reality-based principles that are coherent and it can be applied and can be understood by both the people out there. I know I'm breaking the law if I do this. It's not a borderline case, right? The cop knows, yes, if that happens, that's probable cause. Whatever, even if there's an innocent excuse, that objectively is probable cause. It's got to be a series of objectively applicable rules like that, which are all logically integrated into a unified whole. And the perspective you get here, ladies and gentlemen, the Ayn Rand Center UK is one you're not going to find other places. We have an answer that neither the conservative intrinsicists nor the leftist nominalists who go by their pragmatist seat of their pants have. Neither have. We have a principled position on morality and rights, and one that takes into account all of the facts. So, yes, ladies and gentlemen, there are unknowns here. I'm just coming around to the facts of this particular case. There are facts that neither Michael or I fully know. And let me suggest that it's probably best for us to withhold judgment until we know those facts, even if the IDF says their rules have been broken. I want to know the rule that was broken. I want to know something about that rule for my evaluation. Now, Israel should use whatever discipline they have. If the rules were violated, they need to enforce their rules against their soldiers. But for me to morally evaluate the situation, I need the facts. I need the facts. And no one little concrete, like I'm waving a white flag or crying out in Hebrew, is probably, I need to know the full context to know that it really was negligence on the part of IDF. But as I say, even if it were negligence, the intentional homicidal act on the part of Hamas supersedes it.
Sure. Jim, I just take issue with one thing. You said there's facts we don't know. I don't think there's facts that you and I don't know. We pretty much know everything. I'm just,
Well, I may
I'm
not
just,
be able to
I'm
decide.
just kidding.
I'm not omniscient. But
I'm
even in
just
this
kidding.
case, if this is all we can, but there are cases when, as a prosecutor, I was presented, cops would come to me and say, "These are all the facts I've got, Jim." I said, "Well, that's not enough. If that's all we have, then I will never know. And if all the facts that you and I do know about this are all we'll ever be able to know, then maybe we'll never be able to." That's the other thing, folks. People have to be willing to say in the appropriate context, first, cool your jets and figure out all that you can figure out. And then, even if you don't know at the end of that investigation, just admit, I don't know. I don't know. As a prosecutor, I can't tell you how many times cops would look at me and they're saying, "You mean this guy gets away with the robbery, the rape, the murder?" And I look back at them and I say, "Yeah, that's what that means. I can't charge this guy with that because I can't prove it. It doesn't fit within the rules." And yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we're doing here is giving you a perspective you're not going to get anywhere else. And if you appreciate it, if you appreciate what we're doing here in creating a worldwide community of serious students of objectivism, applying these principles to every issue under the sun, then please consider becoming a paid subscriber to the Ayn Rand Center UK at whatever level you're comfortable with. Um, uh, we're doing important work. If you agree, please show it. This is December. People are in a giving mood because of Hanukkah and Christmas and making financial plans for next year. Ladies and gentlemen, consider becoming a paid subscriber to the Ayn Rand Center UK.
Speaking of money, Jeff Bannister has given $3 and a thumbs up emoji. And thank you very much, Jeff. And I guess we've run our course with this discussion. Are there any announcements, Jim, that you know of that we have to make?
No, nothing more today happening. One of those perks you get if you're a subscriber to the Ayn Rand Center UK is we do discussions every Sunday, lesson by lesson, lecture by lecture of every single one of Leonard Peikoff's courses. We're doing history of philosophy. This morning we were up to Thomas Hobbes, and we're having just the most fantastic discussions on the history of philosophy. But only, ladies and gentlemen, if you're a subscriber at a certain level. So I would urge you to go to the website, find out what perks are available to subscribers, and you can ask direct questions of me about the history of philosophy, Leonard Peikoff's presentation of it, or anything else that we discuss in those contexts. And there are all kinds of things that Razi's working on, more perks, more benefits. So it's a win-win, ladies and gentlemen. Just exactly the kind of thing that the rational free market people like ourselves are in favor of. Take advantage of that win-win.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for tuning in. See you next time.